Good afternoon from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore. My name is Leonie Nagarajan from the Education Department, and I warmly welcome you to the ASEF Youth Dialogue with ASEM Leaders. This dialogue series is part of the 4th ASEF Young Leaders Summit, which is the official youth side event of the 12th ASEM Summit in Cambodia. The ASEF Young Leaders Summit focuses on the theme Sustainable Development in a post-COVID-19 world. And we organize the youth dialogues to ensure an exchange of perspectives and visions on sustainable development between youth leaders and political leaders. Today, we organize the 2nd ASEM Youth Dialogue on Sustainable Development Goal 4, Quality Education, and have the honor to welcome His Excellency Micheál MARTIN, Prime Minister of Ireland. Before we start our conversation, which is led by youth leaders, I would like to invite ASEF's Executive Director, Ambassador Toru Morikawa, to welcome the Taoiseach and our audience. Ambassador Morikawa, please.
Thank you. Your Excellency Micheál MARTIN, Prime Minister of Ireland, youth participants, representative of partner organizations, and distinguished guests. It is a great honor and pleasure to welcome today His Excellency Micheál MARTIN, Prime Minister of Ireland, to our ASEM Youth Dialogue. On behalf of the Asia Europe Foundation, and together with our Cambodian and international partner organizations, I'd like to extend our deep gratitude to the Taoiseach for his presence despite his extremely busy schedule. Yesterday, the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development concluded. Only education, and this means education for all, has a transformative power, and I quote UNESCO, to make informed decisions and take individual and collective action to change our societies and care for the planet. In the time of the current COVID-19 crisis, which is also an education crisis, we need leadership at all levels. Today, we will be inspired by the Taoiseach's words as an ASEM leader and with a background as an educator and school teacher. Today's topic, quality education and lifelong learning for sustainable development in a post-COVID-19 world, starts in the classrooms, moves to university halls, non-formal education spaces, to workplaces, and the political arena. Under your leadership, Ireland has taken a prominent position within ASEM and the ASEM education process. The ASEM Education and Research Hub for Lifelong Learning is hosted by the University College Cork and supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Department of Education and Skill in Ireland. I hope that our young audience today, the leaders of a new generation, will take away many leadership lessons from the Taoiseach's remarks for their future. I wish you an inspiring session.
Thank you, Ambassador Morikawa, for setting the scene and highlighting the importance of education for sustainable development and Ireland's role within the ASEM education process. Today's dialogue on SDG 4 will tackle 3 themes: Ireland's education policy, education in times of COVID-19, and non-formal education and youth. And I give a warm welcome to our youth moderators, Agnese Ciliano from Italy. Agnese works as community officer at the NGO Young European Leadership. Jonathan Dason from Malaysia. Jonathan is a marketing strategist at Digi Telecommunications and vice president at the United Nations Association Malaysia Youth. Alese Davgaluk from the Russian Federation. Alese, you lead the education startup Scholar Network. And last but not least, Joni Hendrick from Ireland. Joni works at the Department of Adult Continuing Education at the University College Cork. She will join us and takes questions later from the audience. I now have the pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, His Excellency Micheál MARTIN, Prime Minister of Ireland. Taoiseach, you graduated from the University College Cork, and while you started your career as an educator, you soon became a politician, first active on the local level as Lord Mayor of Cork and then on a national level. You have a distinguished career trajectory. You have been Minister of Education, Minister of Health, Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and now we have you here as Prime Minister of Ireland. Thank you for being with us today here, Taoiseach. We are eager to hear your thoughts on education, building relations, and transforming lives. Taoiseach, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Leonie, and thank you, Ambassador Morikawa, for your kind introduction, and to the Asia Europe Foundation for the invitation to speak to this inspiring group of young leaders from across Asia and Europe. I was delighted to accept this invitation as, of course, education and youth development are issues very close to my heart, being a former secondary school teacher and indeed being former Minister for Education. And just to say that in many respects, the story of modern Ireland from the 1960s onwards is the story of open access to education. Most commentators would say that the opening up of free second-level education to the Irish population in the 60s was the major catalyst for the modernisation of the country and enabling its full economic potential and growth. And I would have been one of the generations that would have benefited from free second-level education. My parents' generation would not have had that access to second level. They would have finished education at the end of primary, at 12 to 13 years of age, and I would have been the first in my family to proceed on to third level education, along with my brother. And that just kind of illustrates the journey. But it's also a feature of Irish life that defines people generally, this aspiration or this hunger for education. And most parents in Ireland, if it's anything they want for their children, it's access to education. And the last 14 months have only confirmed that conviction as we've worked to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and observed the particular challenges and difficulties it has presented for you as young people. This has been an extraordinary year for young people in education at all levels, involving adaptability and flexibility. So your input now will also be critical as to how we work to build a sustainable and inclusive global recovery, restoring opportunities for young people and your generation. I'm absolutely certain that this effort can only succeed through genuine international cooperation, and the relationship between Europe and Asia is crucial in this regard. One of the overarching themes of your summit is unlearn, learn, relearn. It is a phrase that got me thinking when I first read it, and I think it speaks to the value of all of us approaching difficult issues with a truly fresh and open mind and a readiness to have our own assumptions challenged. I hope that in the process of engaging with this programme, each of you, as potential leaders of the future, get to challenge yourself in this way, to confront whatever assumptions you may bring to the debates you will have, and then to grow from the process. Ireland may be a small country and very far from some of you, where some of you are in Asia, but we have always been an outward-looking people, keen to work, to trade, to share our culture and our friendship with people around the world. Our foreign policy is rooted in a commitment to bilateral and multilateral partnership. Our Asia-Pacific strategy, and as a country we have an Asia-Pacific strategy, which was published last year, sets out these strategic objectives for our engagement with countries from Pakistan to Japan to New Zealand and everyone in between. In that strategy, we are committed to harnessing our experience in education to enhance our governmental, institutional and people-to-people relations. I see this meeting and the opportunity to engage with you today as one very practical example of how we can deliver, in part, on that commitment. The story, as I said earlier, of modern Ireland is a story of transformation through education. And for me, education is the most important and most powerful driver of opportunity, of economic prosperity, and of social progress. It transforms lives, communities, and countries. It is also an important tool for building meaningful links between countries, helping us to learn more about and from people in other parts of the world. Deepening understanding is a key element of our approach in our Asia-Pacific strategy. We have set ourselves the challenge of building much greater knowledge about the social and cultural characteristics of countries in the region, across government and in business and academia. As part of our effort to deliver it, we are very pleased to be hosting the ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub in University College Cork, an institute deeply committed to developing our understanding and practical application of learning techniques. Education is also at the heart of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 4 commits all states to provide inclusive, equitable and quality education for all, and also to promote lifelong learning opportunities. As I've said, in Ireland, we know firsthand the transformative effect that education can have on social and economic development, and we bring this experience to our international partnerships. Within our policy for international development, a better world, we've attached a particular focus to education in emergencies and education for girls. This includes allocating at least €250 million to global education between 2019 and 2023. Just yesterday, we announced a new €60 million funding pledge for the Global Partnership for Education. And this will contribute to transforming education systems in up to 90 countries, reaching 175 million girls and boys. Ireland's commitment to official development assistance in the area of education increased from 39 million in 2018 to 43.4 million in 2019. We are working closely with other education stakeholders on promoting adolescent girls' education. Last year, Ireland launched the Drive for 5 initiative at the United Nations, calling for meaningful action to get all adolescent girls into school and learning in supportive, safe and healthy environments. Ireland addresses gender inequalities and the social barriers to girls participating in education through gender-responsive education planning, creating safe school environments, reducing the risk of gender-based violence and then by financial supports for girls from poor, marginalised and vulnerable households. Our humanitarian partnerships also support education initiatives targeted at internally displaced and refugee children. Since 2019, Ireland has contributed $6.85 million to the Education Cannot Wait Fund, which mobilises political and financial support for education services for children and young people affected by conflict and other crises across the globe. Here in Ireland, we believe that everybody, irrespective of age, should have access and should have equal opportunity to access a high-quality education. It is this core ambition that Ireland has for our own citizens that motivates our engagements internationally. The eradication of poverty and disadvantage and the adoption of a rights-based approach to education and opportunity is key to achieving prosperity and peace. This requires deliberate strategic policy interventions. Education and skills training must target all citizens and provide opportunities for all to participate on an equal footing. As young leaders, you will know well that for young people to become an active and important part of tomorrow's citizenship, a lot is asked of you. You must really understand, of course, and you must master diversity. You must learn how to cooperate with others locally, nationally, and internationally. You must be open to the innovation and versatility which comes from intercultural and international experiences, and face the challenges and understand the potential of greater digitalization and the AI and automation revolution that is coming. These are just some of the reasons why upskilling and reskilling through lifelong learning will be an ongoing necessity for our people, our economies, and for our societies. As governments, we must ensure that all sectors of our economy have timely access to a highly skilled and flexible labour force that meets the different existing and future skills needs of our economy and of our society. I'm delighted that Ireland's reputation as a destination for quality education is reflected in very significant numbers of international students studying in Ireland, including many from Asia-Pacific regions. And it is important to say that they add at least as much to our educational environment as they benefit from it. Students in Ireland gain a well-regarded education, a safe and rich European cultural experience, and enhanced professional prospects into the future. Our success will always depend on our people, those who undertake research, create successful companies, and work in our industries. Our citizens have also contributed as teachers throughout the world. It is always a source of great pride when I meet people from distant countries who tell me, sometimes even with an Irish accent, about the excellent education they received from Irish teachers. As the past year has shown us, global connections are more important than ever. The great global effort in COVID research and vaccine development has also shown the immense life-changing benefits that can come from global engagement. My hope is that with this renewed commitment to multilateralism, the global community will apply some of that same energy and urgency to the challenge of ensuring a quality education for everyone. I commend the Asia-Europe Foundation for focusing on this area in this summit, and I hope that all of you, the young leaders on this call, will bring your own particular energy and expertise to what I truly believe is the great enabler of global progress and peace. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your summit, and I now look forward to taking some of your questions. Thank you indeed.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you for addressing us with this keynote speech and also for sharing your sharp views on education with the ASEF Young Leaders. Your Excellency, you touched upon the access to education, and you also mentioned the role of education in modernizing and transforming countries by mentioning the case of Ireland. In this first section, we would like to ask you a couple of questions on the education system in Ireland. We will also address some of the questions from the audience. So I would highly encourage all the participants to submit their questions in the Q&A section. Going to my first question, I'd like to ask you, Your Excellency, what can Ireland's education system offer to the next generation of young people looking for jobs that are yet to be developed for the digital economy and for an environment that might disrupt work as it is due to climate change or another pandemic?
I think the most important contribution that our education system can make to preparing people for the future, some of which is unknown, is to do two fundamental things. One is to impart that sense of curiosity and inquiry, adaptability and flexibility of mind. And that's one strand, that's the most important and the most fundamental. We want our people to be curious, to ask questions, to have flexibility and adaptability, and have the capacity to learn new things. And not to be phased is the word we might use, and not to be put off by new challenges. And also, I passionately believe that all education, culture and learning should instill self-confidence and self-belief in young people. For me, and I say this to young people every time I meet them, children generally and teenagers, when I go to schools, we all are held back by a lack of self-confidence and self-belief. And we must instill self-belief, self-esteem in life, and that will take people a long way. Now, specifically, of course, our education system at all levels has to adapt in terms of the curriculum and in terms of making sure that in the technological era, digital literacy and The utilization of new technologies is something that begins at the earliest years, and an understanding of technology and how technology evolves and how it changes from generation to generation. And what is very, very important, that all children get access to the basics of technology. If I could draw a comparison, when you think of the financial crash of 2008, 2009, 2010, I remember reading a short paperback by Kenneth Galbraith, the great economist, who said the great trick of the financial world was to make the financial world appear as beyond the reach of most ordinary people. You know, that it's too complicated and too difficult for us all to worry about, and just take the advice of the financial experts, and whether it's just getting a mortgage or whether it's just doing a financial contract, trust the financial advisors. It's all too difficult. And there's a bit of that with technology as well. Many of us feel it's for the tech nerds, or it's for people who know all about software or whatever. And I think we just need to be careful of that. I think we need to make sure that all people have access to the fundamentals underpinning all of these new technologies. So that's the key. Now, we have all sorts of structures. I'm not going to go through all of that with you, but the fundamentals are that people have self-confidence, self-esteem, and also that they have that curiosity. And also, we tell people from an early age, not that they're all listening from an early age. By the way, education is going to go on much longer than you think it is. You will be learning for a long time. But you just keep dropping that note to young people on an ongoing basis. So I just find on climate change, we have green schools throughout our system. And so there's really, really good awareness in our primary system, and by doing as well as by teaching. So great initiatives on climate change in all our schools.
Thank you, Taoiseach. I'd like to highlight how you mentioned flexibility and curiosity, and this definitely shows a wider look at education and also the broadened role of education in addressing different challenges, not only for young people, and this definitely shows in the ongoing commitment of Ireland in the ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub. And for this reason, I'd like to ask you another question that is more related to lifelong learning. And I'd like to ask you, Your Excellency, how do you think governments can reduce the stigma that higher education is only for youngsters and actively encourage older adults to go back into relevant education to grasp new skills to be more competitive in the fast-changing job markets that have eradicated manual jobs?
Well, the first point I would make is we know from research that the more qualified you are, or the more educated you are, if I use that phrase in its most basic way, your life chances economically are better in terms of securing meaningful employment. So that underpins all our policy in terms of communicating to people the value of education for your own sake as an individual, and for getting jobs. Now, I always have an issue about overlinking education to the jobs market. No, we have to do that, and we have a strong partnership with industry. We have a strong partnership with companies at third level. But I often, if I'm giving advice to a young person on careers, and I'm often asked, because I'm a former teacher and so on, and some people will say to me, look, he or she wants to do this, but there's no jobs there, you know? I say back with passion, no, do what they love, you know? That's the first thing. I encourage students to pursue what they love, what they're good at. They will find work. They will apply their knowledge and their passion for a given subject in life. That's just a general point. The most important point, however, for lifelong learning, from my own experience, and something I think we've done well in Ireland now over the last 25 years, is we've created a qualification framework that facilitates progression and a bit more equality in terms of the types of education you access vis-a-vis qualification. What do I mean by that? I mean, traditionally, historically, you went to second level, you went to university, or you went to some form of third level. And very often the institution was more important than the student. Whereas what we've managed to do with what we call a national qualifications framework, so you have levels, and I think other countries have this as well, is we've made the student center as opposed to the institution. And that enables people of all ages to say, I can tap in here, do this program and get a level 7 or a level 8 or a level 9, irrespective of whether I'm studying from home, whether I'm studying in various third level institutes or through modules. And that, to me, it's very, very attractive to older learners to say, you know, here, there's my pathway, there's the qualification, there's the progression. And I think that has worked for us. So, and our further education sector is one I was involved in when I was Minister for Education 20 years ago. It was an evolving sector. It's a sector, I suppose, between second level and third level, and it's very connected to the world of work. It can be used as a pathway to third level, or indeed as a pathway to work. It's proven to be very, very, I think, has been a radical departure over the last 20 odd years in Irish education. But it's all about progression, and that when you finish a module or you finish your year or 2 years, you have a qualification that corresponds with the national levels, and that enables you to progress at your pace to further qualifications if you wish.
Thank you, Taoiseach. It's very inspiring to see how the human-centered approach for learners is an important aspect for Ireland, and how these might change the role of education and support the new leaders, but also ongoing leaders at different stages of their lives. I'm sure that the audience will have more questions on this topic, and Johnny will continue addressing some of those.
Thank you, Agnesa. Diagwit Taoiseach, on behalf of all participants here, I'd just like to say Gurv Mila Mahagat for participating in today's dialogue on SDG 4. We've had a lot of questions coming in from the chat. You mentioned previously that Ireland's education system has evolved and adapted throughout generations. And while that is the case, James from Australia would like to know who is responsible for evolving the Irish education system to create the skills, knowledge, and innovation needed for green, just, and fair economies of the future.
But the overarching responsibilities with the government of today and the Minister for Education, but we have a collaborative and partnership approach to the development of Irish education, partnership with parents, with the patrons of schools, with different school types, and indeed with the teachers and stakeholders and the unions. So, for example, we have a national curriculum body which is made up of the different stakeholders, and they constantly review the curriculum and bring out updated curriculum in relation to certain subjects. Now, NGOs or non-governmental organizations and voluntary bodies like Untitled, for example, and others contribute on the green front. So, for example, there's a collaborative approach on green flag schools. That has been an initiative that has been there for well over 25 years now, where if schools are invited to participate, and if they achieve certain standards, they are awarded a green flag, and they proudly put the green flag up on the entrance to the school as an example of their commitment to the environmental issues and to climate change. So the curriculum body, through the various subjects and the importance of issues, say like climate, or indeed global issues, or you have to integrate it into the curriculum. My own view, sometimes there's always a tendency in education, we want subject specific, you know, but then the hours run out in the day. You just don't have enough hours in the day to do everything that everybody wants education to do for society. So the trick is to integrate it into your history curriculum, into your geography curriculum, into your English curriculum, and that is the real sweet spot, so to speak, in terms of how you really get a broad-based approach to issues like the climate and environmental issues. We've made, my view is, and it's interesting politically, how in the last decade or so the importance, obviously, of climate and green issues has developed. And I think education has actually played its own subliminal role in that, in terms of these programs of primary. There's generations coming out of our schools now that, for many, it's a no-brainer that we have to look after the planet and we have to look after the world, and that is in turn influencing policy.
Thank you, Taoiseach. It's great to hear that the Irish government looks outwards towards parents and teachers for partnership to help evolve the Irish education system. I think that's very inspiring and great to hear from both my own perspective, but I think from an international perspective also. We will now go to Jason Dason from Malaysia, who will take or ask questions on COVID-19 and education.
Thank you very much, Joni. Good morning, Your Excellency. I'm Jonathan from Malaysia. So I like the fact that you mentioned about the integration of environmental education into the education system itself, and so as to not separate it into two separate parts. Now I'd just like to shift the focus just a little bit to something that has affected us all globally, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic. And how it affects education. So the first question would be, how has the education system in Ireland tried to support its students and teachers from a mental health perspective before and during COVID-19? Has the approach changed or improved?
My belief would be that the situation has changed and has improved in the sense that we gave specific supports to the concept of well-being in schools during COVID-19. So we've had three waves, 2 severe lockdowns. The first lockdown in early spring last year resulted in school closures. So there was a big push to get schools reopened for September. So we put huge resources financially, to do all the physical preparation for schools and all of that, and PPE. But more importantly, we gave guidance to all schools around the well-being framework, and supports around guidance counsellors at second level. We employed additional psychologists to the National Psychological Education Service to give further advices and supports to schools, because we were conscious that this was unprecedented for children, a global pandemic, and we, in terms of, for some children have been affected by the pandemic. It's created anxiety, it's created stress. Our non-governmental organisations in mental health have reported much higher volumes of calls and contacts, largely around stress, anxiety arising from the pandemic, particularly in the earlier phase. So it was very important psychologically to get the schools open again last September, which we successfully did, but to add supports. Now, people would say maybe not enough. That will always be said about governments, but we specifically included in the reopening programme a well-being framework, and we said all schools, this is very important in terms of reacclimatizing children back to education, but also in terms of the impact of the pandemic on them individually and as a collective. So we added extra resources to support schools in relation to that. We then had to close again in January, which is a big shock to us because we successfully reopened. We had a very tough third wave in Christmas, in December, January. We hadn't anticipated that lockdown. We've reopened, we reopened in April, which was great news for us gradually. And our exams now, our state examinations will take place and are taking place now at the end of second level. So it has been very, very challenging for us. And we're now providing additional supports during the summer. If schools want to do summer programs for children with special needs or children who've been educationally disadvantaged because of the pandemic, we're providing programs that schools can deliver during the summer months. And we will evaluate this because we believe, I might be jumping onto another question, we believe that some students lost out during the pandemic, despite all of our efforts and despite all the technology. So we're very conscious that we have to evaluate this and make sure that we can enable children to recover both educationally and psychologically.
Thank you very much for your answer, Taoiseach. It's very good to hear that the Irish government has focused on implementing a well-being framework to take care of the students mentally as well. But education comes in two parts, right? It's both in the head, mental, but it's also physical, right? There's a physical component that is involved in education. So the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about an increased emphasis on online learning. What is the Irish experience with this, both at the secondary and the tertiary levels? how do we ensure that individuals with poorer internet connectivity or low access to suitable devices don't get left behind?
I think it's very difficult. I'm not going to pretend we got it all right now here, you know, in terms of during the pandemic. The first wave was, we use a phrase, ropey or patchy, or some good, some poor. Where children are in educational disadvantaged families or have difficulties or challenges at home, it was very difficult. And we had schemes for schools from economically disadvantaged areas, and they would have reported back that some of their best students might have only had a mobile phone, you know, and that was very difficult. So obviously we allocated out technology, equipment and so on to schools and to try and give to students. Our basic belief is you can never quite replace the human interaction in the classroom with technology. I remember about 20 odd years ago, as education minister, was it that long ago, maybe? I was in a room with Bill Gates. I'm not name dropping, don't get me wrong, but he was in Czech Republic, and there was a group of education ministers on how does one apply technology to education. And it was a big thing at the time. I brought in a program called IT 2000. We're going to go for it, you know. And but what Gates himself admitted was no one had quite cracked the application of technology to learning, really. Now, we get all the connectivity thing and all that, but this, look, I'm old-fashioned. I think that human interaction is key in education. It's not as, it's an intangible in some respects, but that's my view. No, so, but that said, we can do an awful lot through technology. What was interesting, the feedback for the second lockdown was much better. Parents saying schools were much better the second time around. They had adapted, they had learned more, they were on top of it more than they were in the first wave. So I think it will change education. I think you're going to maybe get a form of blended learning into the future. I think you might get a more efficient, using that word, more efficient learning process, where teachers and educators might say, look, here's what we can do technologically, but we can do far more now in the classroom. So that will be interesting, and particularly at third level. Our third level has not been great, I argue. Sorry, I mean, they're all working hard in terms of the online experience, but we haven't had third level students physically back in the campus, by and large. Some can come back for laboratory work and that, and I have a young lad myself who's 22nd year in UCC, where Joni is, and so on, but like, he has had, I think, 3 months in first, no, sorry, a good 6 months in first year, and then bang, colleges closed down. This year hasn't gone at all. It's all online. So that's not a great third level experience, and I feel genuinely sorry for young people. What is a very formative experience of your lives, having to do it all online. I mean, universities and third level campuses and institutes of technology, they're all about the campus. You know, it's about the multidisciplinary mixing. It's about the societies. It's about the debates. It's about the arguments. I'm a passionate believer in the on-campus experience, and that's missing now at the moment. So we're very keen now that in the next academic session we're going to restore, come what may, the on-campus experience for third level students, and that's a big plan we're working on as we vaccinate larger sections of our population.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. As a university student once before myself, I really do agree with you that the human aspect of on-campus learning is really important. Right now, I'll just like to pass the floor over to Joni, because I believe that there are a lot of questions coming in.
Thank you, Jonathan. Taoiseach, you mentioned quite a lot the importance of access to education in Ireland, and we've had a lot of questions from participants wanting to know, how do you promote inclusive education for people with disabilities, especially now during the pandemic?
Yeah, I've been involved in special education for a long time, and we had a lot of catching up to do. And in the late 1990s, we began a sea change in mainstreaming special education through the provision of special needs assistance, resource teachers for children with special needs in mainstream schools, autism units within mainstream schools for children with autism, with special pupil teacher ratios, 1 teacher, 2 special needs assistants to 6 pupils in a unit within primary and second level. And my basic principle is that what should apply is that children with special needs should have the absolute same access rights as children who don't have special needs. And historically, that was not always the case. I believe that one size does not fit all, so we need a variety of provision. Predominantly mainstream, there will be, in my view, a need for special schools where you have severe and profound disability, which requires specific focused responses. And there's a big international debate around that. I'm looking forward to the future. I'm saying, and we had a special education cabinet subcommittee meeting recently to look ahead at this, because in some parts of the country we've had difficulties. In Cork, we've had difficulties with access for some children to post-primary. And I believe our post-primary system must be better for children with special needs than our primary system. Our primary system has adapted well from those initiatives of 20-odd years ago, but the post-primary is catching up. Post-primary can be more difficult because it's more subject-specific. And very often at second level, the teacher is more focused on the subject. At primary, the teacher teaches the whole class, all subjects. That's our system by and large. But at post-primary, it's the history teacher, it's the French teacher, it's the maths teacher. And what we're saying to the maths teacher is you've got children with special needs in your class, and you've got to accommodate that and facilitate that. And that takes a lot of learning and change of culture. And we're still making progress on that. We have to do more on that, in my view. And that means, in terms of legislatively, we're saying we've already brought in provision as a parliament, but it's not strong enough, where every school has to accept children with special needs. And I'm working on creating greater advocacy for children within our system, so that the system, the state, advocates for the child, as opposed to parents having to apply for this school and that school. That's a concern I have, that there's too much stress and strain on the parents. So therefore, I'm saying, because in our constitution, children have a right to an education. So therefore, if they have that right, the state should affirm that right by forward planning, by having the numbers right and saying we need so many places for children next year in this area, and therefore we will provide those places. So that's the work we're doing at second level right now. And also at third level, I've created as part of a policy initiative, I decided we would have a new department of higher education and further education and training. And the importance of that is that we now need to focus more on how can third level accommodate young people with special needs more. Like Trinity Access, Trinity has a very strong program. UCC have an excellent centre where we believe we can do more. We do have supports for young people with special needs in terms of assistance attending with them to access education, but that tends to be more for physical and sensory special needs. The intellectual special needs space hasn't been accommodated enough at third level, and so Minister Simon Harris is very keen on moving on that front and opening up third level education more to young people with special needs, and particularly young people with autism, Asperger's, and young Down syndrome, for example. We've had some rare but good examples of young people with Down syndrome accessing education, and we just need to make it easier and more accessible in that regard, because it enriches everybody's life. That has been my experience.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We've spoken a lot about secondary level education and formal third level education. Therefore, we'll now move to Alessia, who will ask questions on non-formal education and youth.
Thank you so much, Joni, and good morning, Your Excellency. My name is Alessia. I am from Russia. And with regard to non-formal education, the first question that I'm going to pose to you is something that I personally relate to a lot, because I am currently working with a non-profit youth organization where we're designing extracurricular educational programs for students in our region. So on behalf of ASEF Young Leaders, I would like to ask you, Your Excellency, what would be your best advice for the youth who just started their own campaign or activism or think tank organizations which emphasize providing quality education? And what area in education should they put more focus on?
This is a passion of mine. To me, the most important target for developed countries, if I can use that phrase for all countries, is, first of all, you've got to be very focused on early school leaving phenomenon. So if children leave school early, that would be challenging for those children in terms of their life chances. And some children and some young people, because of background in terms of home or issues, or maybe there could be, you could have ADD, attention deficit disorder. There's all sorts of reasons why a child or a teenager may not just make it into mainstream school or education, or may not suit them, just may not work, or you could have a personality issue with teachers and the student ends up not going to school. So your interventions have to be crucial there, both in assisting schools in identifying the potential early school leaver and adapting your curriculum even within the school to cater for the early school leaver. And we have done that at our leaving certificate level. Now, some people criticize us for our examination system, which can be off-putting and can allow some students to not make it through that particular system. So we created different programs that made it more accessible and enabled people to complete second level without the mainstream exam, but an alternative assessment process. So your assessment processes have to change and your curriculum have to change to try and reduce the level of early school leaving. Now, if somebody leaves school early, your youth work engagement has to be strong, and you need a youth work capacity as well. So we have statutory we support youth organizations, national youth organizations who engage. We also have a program which came in over nearly 30 years ago now, called Youth Reach. So Youth Reach was a program where young people just left school, we'd say. So it was an attempt to reach that cohort and say, come into this non-formal type of education. It's not a school, but you can be there with 20 young people, similar backgrounds maybe to yourself, or not getting on. A program is provided, work skills, and bit by bit it brings people back into learning, but it's an alternative curriculum, an alternative program that's more flexible, easy, adaptable in terms of lifestyle. And that's very, very important. And I would focus on those areas. And it's very interesting. At the moment, I'm grappling with a case in my own city where there's an education life centre, it's called, which basically has been looking after young people who've left school over the last 20 years. And not really getting great state support. And I'm organising state support for that centre right now, because it has been catering for young people who have left mainstream schools. So that's why I would focus on as activism. I would focus on getting a reaction from the government and the state to say, look, this is an area that is critical for the young people, and we need to support in a much better way and be more accepting of it. What I mean by that, administrations and governments, and when I say administration, I mean civil servants, and I don't mean this in a negative way, love neat solutions. You know, it's easier from an administrative point of view. These non-formal centres can be more challenging to administer because the outcomes are not as easy to measure. You know, if you go to mainstream, it's very clear. So many teachers for every class. You know, you're going to do the leaving cert or the junior cert and your end of term examinations, and it's all, the metrics are very clear. In the non-formal setting, they're far less clear. Students may not turn up every morning. You know, a student might turn up 3 mornings out of 5. They may be very angry one morning. In a normal school, they might be expelled from the school or suspended. That can happen in the non-formal setting. It very much depends on the personal relationships that develop in the non-formal setting. So it's a much different area. Now, to be fair to our system, you know, we have created, as I said, schemes, and Youth Reach has been the best known and the most effective. And the apprenticeship model at further education is working well also. So that's what I think. That's, to me, depending on what society you're operating in. For me in Ireland, that's our big agenda. It has to be, because we have very high levels of school completion in Ireland. We're one of the highest in Europe in terms of progression into third level, but there is still that 10% that don't complete second level education, and that for me is just 10% too many, and therefore we must make the extra effort to enable children to complete education. And Joni raised the point about children with special needs, which is a separate area. We've traditionally allowed young people with special needs, when they finish second level, not really to progress beyond that, other than into work spaces or work centres. That's not good enough, you know. So that's another area where there could be better activism.
Thank you so much, Taoiseach. Some really good food for thought on alternative education for potential and current school leavers, early school leavers. So you've touched upon some potential reasons for people to drop out of formal institutions and areas to focus on when you're designing alternative opportunities for them to get some education and skills. But regarding the skills in particular, what skills or subjects do you think are the most important but not often focused enough on by our educators when they're providing education for young people?
This might sound strange. I think communication skills. I don't mean communication in terms of just speaking well. That capacity to, I mean, there's a bit of psychology in this as well. How do you reach out to a person? How do you communicate? I taught in a school where not all the pupils that came in, but some of the people, we did a repeat leaving certificate. Leaving certificate is the end of our second level. Now, some students may not have had their best years in the first set of years, but we would have a cohort of repeat leaving certificates. And there were different types and so on like that, but it was a different type of class. I taught evening students, and I was always struck by the evening student, which were mature students, the hunger they had for learning. But communication is the most key skill. Sometimes you can be a brilliant historian, and I find at third level we don't focus enough on this, but you might be a lousy lecturer. You know, I mean, you might not be able to communicate and get the basics across to the student. And it's great that we have to celebrate a historian in the college, but is that person humble enough to get the basic communication skills to impart the message? No, we do through our teacher training programs at second level. For primary and second level, when we teach teachers to teach, they go through all of that. They go through psychology and presentation and how you make the class interesting and exciting. I'm not as aware that at third level the same sort of approach is taken. I often was of the view, and I didn't get this through when I was Minister for Education in the late 1990s, you know, we have oral examinations for French, we have oral examinations for German, we have oral examinations for Irish. Irish is a native language. So you might have heard at the beginning of this session, Taoiseach. Taoiseach is chieftain in the native language. It's our name for Prime Minister. So we've oral Irish competency exam for all of that. You get marks, and it's the best part of the exam because you can get by it, by and large. We have no oral assessment of English. That has always struck me. And the reason is more administrative. People are saying because it's very expensive and so on like that. And I spoke earlier about self-confidence and self-esteem. Even though we teach English, and even though English is the spoken language of Irish people, the number of people who are scared to go in front of a group and speak is huge. If you think about it, I organised debates among, debating teams in schools and things like that, and I was always passionate about helping young people to debate. But it was always only 3 or 4 in the class that would volunteer to go in front of the 30 in the class or 25 in the class and sort of speak about something because of the self-confidence or this kind of lack of confidence that you can go in front of a group of people and speak. And if you think about it, look what you're doing now. You're in front of an audience speaking. And I just feel, it's a basic thing, it's a hobby horse of mine for a long time. Communications is very, very important in all walks of life. In politics and work, it helps interpersonal relationships. It can break down barriers. I don't think we teach the very basic thing of communications enough.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Wow, I think it's reassuring for me and for other non-native speakers of English here to know that even people in Ireland are a little bit intimidated sometimes to do public speaking using English. Thank you so much for your answers. I will now pass the microphone back to...
You have no reason to be intimidated, Elise. You speak for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now over to Joni, who will pose some questions from our audience.
Thank you, Alyssa. In order to stay on time, we actually won't take any more questions from the audience. However, Taoiseach, can I ask you, do you have any final message or words of inspirations for the youth and the participants of this session before we close it?
Yeah, if you want to take one or two more questions, I'll take them and then I'll wrap up the whole lot then. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So we've actually had a lot of questions on the impact of the pandemic in Ireland. So another question from James from Australia. He would like to know, what positive learnings has COVID-19 had for Ireland that you could share with the world?
I think we are still learning, and it will take a bit of learning. We've learned to value slowing down, if that makes sense a bit more. We have all slowed down in our lives. The value of family, the value of community, and the value of nature. People have rediscovered nature through walking and no, like we all hate the 5-kilometer rule, where we're in the lockdown, we were restricted. We couldn't go beyond 5 kilometers. So, and I walk a lot, so I know every inch of the 5 kilometers around my home now. And I've had enough of it. And that's over. So, but the point is, we've learned a lot that way. And I think we will have to reflect on other lessons. And I think there will be a connection to the pandemic, to the climate change agenda. I do believe people got a shock and are shocked with the degree to which the pandemic has disrupted our lives. And so, whereas climate change and maybe the language around how we explain climate change has been wrong, I think it's been, there's a whole issue of communication of this issue, but suddenly people kind of realize out of the pandemic that climate change isn't some far distant sort of issue that will come in 100 years' time. It's potentially very real. But I think we've learned to slow down is what I feel. And I think we've learned the value of engagement with people. I often hear business people now saying, I actually didn't have to fly as often as I did to this conference or that conference. As a politician, I've had very few social functions in the last year and a half, and which means I've been at home a bit more on a Saturday night or on a Sunday. And it's led to a changed lifestyle. So it'll be interesting to see as we emerge from the pandemic, whether old habits come back or whether society and human nature adapts in a different way to the future in terms of how we behave, but also psychologically in terms of how we engage with our local communities. And the final message to young people, and particularly to the young leaders before us, is I would say, don't put limitations to what you can achieve. Be self-confident. It is important that we have young people who are interested in the world around them and interested in doing the right thing for your community, for your city, for your county, for your region, for your country, and for the world. And I just would say to you that I come from a country that prides itself. We've one of the oldest countries with a constitution we brought in the 1930s, which allows for freedom of speech, freedom of association, free media, which constantly changes to affirm human rights. And the primacy of parliamentary politics is very important, and democracy. And in some parts of the world, democracy is in retreat. And we have to have people who believe in the fundamentals of democracy. Education underpins that democracy, and we should impart to young people. And that's why we do need young people who are active in a sensible way and in an effective way to affirm the importance of freedoms, of basic freedoms, and of democracy across the world. Because with all its faults and with all its flaws, ultimately it's the best enabler for people to live fulfilling lives. that allow people to fully develop. And so I hope I've got that across to you. I just would like you to continue your engagement and maintain that to support the fundamental freedoms that people enjoy and should enjoy well into the future.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Just to reply to your last question, I completely agree. I think the pandemic has opened people's minds up to educate themselves on the impact of climate change. So I think that has really made a positive difference in Ireland and both internationally. Before I pass back to Leonie, I'd just like to say once again, a huge thank you on behalf of all the moderators and participants here for taking the time to participate in today's dialogue. I think it was, really, really interesting. And I think everyone here learned so much about you, but also about Ireland. So I will now pass back to Leonie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joni, and thank you very much for this meaningful conversation, Taoiseach. It was a true pleasure. It brings us now to the end of the session, and before I hand over the floor to our representative from Cambodia, I would like to invite all our participants to put on their cameras to capture the momentum. We do a group photo, and I will count to 3 in Irish to smile. Ahain, Ado, Atri. Wonderful. I think we got the photo at the end. I know His Excellency has a very tight schedule. We now invite His Excellency Sok Sokken, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Cambodia, with the Government of Cambodia hosting the 13th Summit, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Leonie, for the floor. Excellency Micheál MARTIN, Taoiseach of the Ireland, Ambassador Marikawa Turu, young participants from Asia and Europe. On behalf of our participants, I would like to express our deep appreciation to Excellency Micheál MARTIN for taking the time out from your busy schedule to impart your valuable insights during today's ASEM Youth Dialogue. I would like to also commend our youth and our young leaders for your inquisitiveness and dynamism, for having to contribute to the richness of today's discussion. Inclusive and quality education through peace and development are fundamental drivers of sustainable development. For Cambodia, today represents 4 decades after liberation and 2 decades of genuine peace and national unity from the geopolitically driven atrocity and wars, and we are still facing the challenges from the remnants of the past. Cambodia understands all too well the vital importance of education and the challenges involved in restoring an effective education system and its role in bridging the gap of first world demands and the third world delivery capacity. Amongst its myriad of positive effects, quality education cultivates critical thinking and promotes understanding, tolerance, and solidarity. These principles sit at the core of the ASEM process, serving to connect the leaders, institutions, and people of Asia and Europe. Therefore, it is imperative that we continue to ensure quality education for all and promote lifelong learning opportunities. In fulfilling this monumental task, we need our youth to rise to the occasion and get involved within their own communities and internationally through platforms such as the ASEF YLS. Undeniably, gone are the days when multilateralism is strictly the domain of governments. As today's dialogue demonstrates, progress towards realizing 2030 agenda is possible only when all stakeholders, including but not limited to our youth, governments, and multilateral institutions such as ASEF and other ASEM initiatives, engage with one another and collaborate effectively. With that, I would like to officially conclude our ASEM Youth Dialogue and wish each of us good health and success, and I look forward to welcoming you to Cambodia later this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, His Excellency Sok Sokken. At the very end, we hope it was an enriching session for you and you take away many new ideas from Ireland, from the Prime Minister, who is an educator. And Taoiseach, I have learned a beautiful quote from you. You spoke at the last ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub Forum and quoted an Irish dramaturg George Bernard Shaw. You might remember this quote, and I think it summarizes what we have done today, our exchange of ideas. So allow me to quote, "If you have an apple and I have an apple, and we exchange these apples, then you and I will still each have one apple. But if you have an idea and I have an idea, and we exchange these ideas, then each of us will have two ideas." I think we have many of them today. Thank you so much. And a goodbye from the Asia Europe Foundation.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.